Welcome to our first Social Capitalist Luncheon Series. My name is Jennifer Baker-Jones, and it is my pleasure to serve as MC today. I am the board chair at SCI, and I am pleased to support this organization because of all of the incredible work SCI is doing across Eastern Massachusetts, working at the community level to activate communities and neighbors. Today's event will feature the presentation of the Connect for Community Impact Award and a panel discussion about collaboration. Before we go to the awards presentation, we're going to take a few minutes to hear about SCI's mission and recent accomplishments. First, let me introduce David Crowley, president and founder of SCI.
Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks everyone for coming. Cultivating connections has always been at the heart of SCI's work. At our very first community meeting, way back in 2002, we got pretty good attendance, but I did notice that St. John's Baptist Church, a mostly African-American congregation, was not at the table. So I reached out to the pastor and went and paid him a visit and had a nice long chat with him as well as Ron Walker. We came up with a plan to collaborate on making what had been an internal MLK luncheon just for the church to a broader community celebration of the holiday. That was the beginning of a long and fruitful collaboration. We've done many things over the years, but one that really sticks with me and feels relevant today, given recent events, is back in 2016, in response to a wave of anti-Black racist violence that was going on at that time, we got together and planned a community vigil and then a follow-up series of dialogues on race and diversity, one of many things we've done together. More recently, we've had to figure out how to continue cultivating those connections while not being able to physically come together. But the ties we developed over the years, we found very beneficial as the pandemic first hit. We found ourselves coordinating weekly meetings among partners that enabled us to get volunteers to go out and deliver food and other supplies to people who are quarantining. More recently, we tapped some of those longtime connections we had to launch a new vaccine equity program. We tapped former board chair for SCI, Al Calvo, and the Hispanic American Institute to offer a series of Zoom trainings to train their folks and their networks to be ambassadors for the vaccine. And thanks, by the way, to Gladys Vega for serving on one of those panels. The second key element of SCI's work has to do with developing leaders. Recently, we developed an exciting new program in this category called the Youth Grant Pitch Contest. Through that program, teams of young people were matched with volunteer coaches who helped them develop a project to address the mental health needs of their peers. They worked over the period of about a month together and then presented their ideas to a panel of judges. 5 of those teams were awarded grants to then carry out their projects, and they did some great things. If you're coming to the reception on Thursday evening, you want to grab me or Phil, or grab me or another SCI team member, and they'll tell you more about it. Another example of the developing leaders, we do also do some adult leadership development, and that's actually been a key part of our vaccine equity work. And through that program, we have seen leaders get trained to educate folks in their network about the importance of getting vaccinated and answer folks' questions. And so we've had Vitaly working within her Haitian church community to educate people, as well as Karina, who's been working at a Lynn Middle School to educate fellow parents at that school. And a thanks to Dr. Tutwiler for helping make that one happen. The third and final key element of our mission that what we're building up to with the other pieces is about strengthening communities. As I've alluded to, in the past 2 years, we have found some ways to keep people connected through Zoom meetings and so forth. But after over a year of it, we were, like most people, very eager to get out there for some in-person community building. So our Deputy Director, Phil Gordon, and Chair, Jennifer Baker-Jones, started working on a Juneteenth Woburn event to happen, yes, outdoors. And it was natural to reach out to longtime partner St. John's, as we also reached out to some new partners for that event as well. And it was great, after a lot of being cooped up in our houses, to be out there on the lawn of the Woburn Public Library on a bright June day, getting ready to celebrate Juneteenth. And as Ron Walker started to take the stage to share his remarks on behalf of the church, I paused and thought about what can happen when we really focus on building bridges and developing strong relationships over the years. I thought back to things I learned from Ron, hearing him tell about stories growing up in Philly and how he bravely got in a car as a college-age student to drive down to Mississippi to participate in the Freedom Summer. And then Ron was able to draw on that experience he had growing up to help work with SCI to shape a program where youth got to learn about the civil rights movement from those who participated in it. And then more recently, he provided some coaching to Phil and the rest of our team as we were developing a workshop for teens on critical race theory. It's really a real testament to see what we can do when we come together and develop those relationships over the years. As we slowly emerge from the pandemic and take stock of the inequities and racism that persist, there's so much to be done to create the safe, healthy, and inclusive communities that we all desire. At SCI, we believe a great place to start is cultivating those relationships and developing leaders who can work together to create stronger, more equitable communities. Thank you for joining with us today and supporting that work.
I would now like to call upon Phil Gordon, SCI's Deputy Director, to tell us more about the SCI AmeriCorps program.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good afternoon and welcome to everyone who has joined us today. SCI supports youth success in Greater Boston by connecting young people to relationships, experiences, and resources they need to succeed through the SCI AmeriCorps program. Each year between September and June, SCI AmeriCorps members engage in volunteer outreach and capacity building activities that increase volunteer engagement, provide leadership training, and create service learning opportunities for youth serving programs at our nonprofit partner organizations. As a former SCI AmeriCorps member, I can personally attest to the positive impact that I believe one individual can have on a community through my experience serving at the James L. McCown Boys and Girls Club of Woburn, my hometown. For me, it was a real-life example of social capital in action because my service directly led to employment with SCI and eventually the role I am in today as the Deputy Director. More importantly, the lessons I've learned from the community members I now get to work with, the youth I'm privileged to still engage with through volunteering, and the members who serve with us continue to inform my vision for the future of the SCI AmeriCorps program as it finishes its 15th year, with over 300 members who have served in Massachusetts communities. So now it is my honor to introduce Jessica Webb, SCI AmeriCorps Youth Leadership Coordinator, who is serving at the Girls Inc. of Lynn. Each year, our members encounter unique challenges while completing their service terms, yet always manage to make a significant impact at their host sites. I warmly welcome Jessica to the mic to share a bit about her experience and impact.
Thank you, Phil. So as an AmeriCorps member, the first question I always get is the why. And when my mom was my age, she did the Peace Corps in Ecuador. So moving from Los Angeles to the Boston area to do AmeriCorps was like nothing. It was like small potatoes in my family. But I grew up in Los Angeles, and growing up in Los Angeles, I experienced community violence. And so I always knew I wanted to get into reducing community violence. I just didn't know the exact means of doing that. In college, I went to school in the third safest city in America and then experienced and survived a mass shooting. So I learned that it doesn't matter what type of community, there's going to be problems and like violence everywhere. But what does matter is the resources that are provided to that community. my senior year of college, I was exposed to the opioid epidemic and learned that if you want to reduce community violence, a huge component of that is substance abuse prevention. So that's how I ended up at Girls Inc. of Lynn as an AmeriCorps member, and through SCI, I've just learned so much about substance abuse prevention and directly working with communities and community organizing. AmeriCorps is not a one-size-fits-all, but it is a great launch pad into a long-lasting career of service. So thank you, SCI, and thank you, Phil, for being such a great support during this whole process.
Jessica, thank you so much for sharing your story and your story of service with SCI. As you may know, the Social Capitalist Luncheon is our biggest fundraiser of the year. Your donations help SCI to cultivate connections, develop leaders, and strengthen communities. Your support is so crucial at this time because we must continue to leverage our relationships to address the inequities and that persist in our communities. We are grateful for the support we have received thus far from our generous sponsors, and we have raised $66,000 already. Now, our goal is to raise an additional $5,000 at our 2 virtual luncheon events. David, can you please let people know how they can donate?
Sure, Jennifer. It's pretty simple with our text to give. Just send a new text message to 50155 with the message SCI 2022. So that's SCI 2022 to the number 50155. And then you'll get some prompts being asked how much you'd like to give, and you don't have to do it right now. You'll get friendly reminders, and you can pay whenever you get a chance after the event.
Great, thank you so much. Now it is time for our Connect for Community Impact presentation. Eastern Bank has generously sponsored this award since 2016. I would now like to turn it over to Eastern Bank CEO, Bob Rivers. But first, let me just say how much we appreciate all of your generous support of SCI, Bob, and all you do in the community.
Well, great. Well, thank you, Jennifer. Appreciate that kind introduction, and David, to you for the opportunity to join this terrific event again this year. And many thanks to you and your team at SCI Social Capital for your great work that is now more important than ever. I really appreciate both Jessica and Phil really bringing that to life, and thanks for sharing your stories and your great work. You know, there have been so many things that have driven us apart over the past 26 months, either physically or philosophically, issues that have stressed the shared values, networks, and collaboration that are the necessary ingredients in developing social capital. However, we have nonetheless witnessed a higher degree of engagement between leaders from different constituencies throughout our community than ever before, something we'll address during our panel discussion later in the program. Organizations like SCI Social Capital support and facilitate such cross-sectoral and cross-cultural convenings like today's, and we are very grateful for it. For the past 7 years, I've had the privilege of presenting SCI's annual Connect for Community Impact Award to leaders in various Massachusetts gateway cities, people who leverage their own social capital and that of others in their community to make a significant positive impact in a variety of ways. In recommending such honorees over the years, I was ever mindful of someone else who was thoroughly deserving of this recognition, whose leadership in many respects helped build the model gateway city, establishing the gold standard for others in terms of economic growth, education, the rights of veterans, immigrants, and the LGBTQ+ community, taking action to meet the challenges of climate change and the opioid crisis, and most recently in addressing the needs of her most vulnerable citizens in the face of the pandemic. During her 16 years as the first woman mayor of Salem, Kim Driscoll has revitalized our city, taking it from one with record deficits and a declining bond rating to one that has been recognized as one of the best places to live in America. And she has done all of this and more while serving in a number of statewide roles, broadening her extensive network of partners and collaborators. Often mentioned as a candidate for higher office in several potential roles throughout her career, she is now taking the plunge as a candidate for lieutenant governor. As she looks to transition to this new role, leaving Salem so much better than she found it, I am truly delighted to present Kim Driscoll with SEI's Connect for Community Impact Award. Congratulations.
Thanks, Bob. Really appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you today. And thank you for your kind words and for all the support that you've given so many gateway cities. Eastern really stepped up to the plate due to your leadership to make sure all of us had the sorts of resources and the connectivity to be successful. And I think that, you know, it's obviously the theme of this particular award, but I feel so fortunate and blessed to be leading a community that has people who really care about this place. And I think that makes the job of someone who's leading a community that much easier when you have this history of investing in what I call the scaffolding and the structure that brings people together. When that happens, the relationships form and the collective, you know, appreciation for the things that make your community special and those aligned goals and how we improve them really come to life. We're fortunate that we've been making investments in organizations like the Salem Partnership. Your predecessor, Bob, helped start that at Eastern Bank as a key leader. Salem for All Ages, and then obviously the Salem Together movement during this pandemic. Those relationships are really key toward a pro-Salem agenda, whether it's tackling a pandemic or supporting a community mission for thriving youth or implementing an age-friendly agenda for our community. It's so much about a pro-Salem agenda coming together with individuals, organizations, and people who are all pulling in the same direction. Even when there's disagreements around the tactics of how to achieve success, we've got our nonprofits, our private sector, our public sector, our small businesses, and our elected officials and everyday residents really pulling in the same direction for a pro-Salem agenda. And that's what makes not only Salem special, but the opportunity to recognize the value of social capital and the success of a community. And if your community is thriving and vibrant and successful, we know that's really about the people and the quality of life that you have here. So grateful for this recognition. It's really a whole lot of people who have come together and really feel fortunate to lead a city where people care about this place. And it makes it a little bit easier to lock arms towards a successful outcome. So thank you.
Yeah, well, once again, Kim, congratulations. I am proud to call you a friend and a partner, and look forward to you having an even greater impact across the Commonwealth in the years ahead. So again, terrific to have you here. So we're going to move on to our panel, and Mayor Driscoll will be joining today's panel discussion along with the following panelists who are also exemplars of social capital throughout the Commonwealth. So first we have Betty Francisco. Betty is an entrepreneur, business executive, attorney, and community leader. She is known as a powerful convener and change maker, unapologetic about creating visibility for Latinx and other BIPOC leaders. She has been named one of the 100 most influential people in Boston by Boston Magazine and to the Power 50 by the Boston Business Journal. I'm also proud to say that Betty is a member of Eastern's board. Next, we have Dr. Patrick Tutwiler, who is the superintendent of the Lynn Public Schools. Over the course of his 2 decades in education, he has served as headmaster, principal, and dean in the public school systems in Boston, Wayland, and Westford. We also have with us today Gladys Vega. Gladys is the executive director of Colaborativa. Based in Chelsea, Gladys and her team work in partnership with Latinx immigrants to design and deliver an array of programs, initiatives, and community organizing campaigns focused on food and housing security, economic advancement, and cultural celebration. A true force of nature, she was named Bostonian of the Year by the Boston Globe for her leadership during the pandemic. Many thanks to each of you for taking the time to join us today. So why don't we jump right into our discussion, and I'll go over the questions that I know you've all received, and but I think they're the questions that are on the minds of all of us. There's just so many things over the past 2 years, and they sadly don't stop. You know, everything from the pandemic to transitioning almost completely virtually, to the worldwide reckoning on racial justice, the increasingly divisive political climate, and most recently manifesting itself in the pending Supreme Court decision regarding a woman's right to choose. In the face of so much adversity, what are some examples that you have seen where social capital has actually strengthened during this challenging time? And I'm going to start with Mayor Driscoll, then go to Betty, to Patrick, and then to Gladys. So Mayor Driscoll.
Yeah, I mean, I think the obvious one for us is certainly this pandemic and the esprit de corps that came out of the pandemic. You know, we had 500 volunteers in our community working together, looking out for more vulnerable members of the city, from food insecurity to vaccine appointments. You really did see people pulling together in ways big and small. We put together a regional homeless quarantine site in 2 weeks, like something that would be unheard of to do if it wasn't for this pandemic. And so despite how challenging it was, and there certainly was a lot of pressure, I think, on local officials who were trying to manage risk for others, there was also this, this ability for people to realize that relying collectively on neighbors was what was going to help us get through this pandemic. And that's a social capital that I think will be with us well beyond this. If we can do those sorts of things in terms of pivoting to get kids computers and digital broadband equity and working towards these goals, I feel like COVID showed us the future, and how do we get comfortable with being uncomfortable in a way that allows us to tackle even more space within the social capital's, environment.
Yeah, great point. Great point. Thank you. Betty, I'll turn to you.
Sure. Well, I want to start off with congratulating Mayor Driscoll on your recognition, as well as this year's SCI Social Capitalist honorees. And thank you so much to SCI and David for all the work that you're doing. And it's great to be here in community with all of you too. So, and during 2020 in particular, similar to what Mayor Driscoll mentioned, I saw organizations that never collaborated before begin to do deep collaboration, coalition building, and even policy work together. So it wasn't just immediate, service response or addressing, whether it was food insecurity or how do you, deal with kids that can't get access to education. All of that happened, as well as deep collaboration on advocacy in order to be able to do emergency response. Personally, I feel really blessed that I connected to a group of nonprofit community lenders, as well as small business support organizations that I didn't really know existed, and came into deep relationship with them, started to do work to support small businesses to apply for the PPP loans. And that led to a coalition forming now called the Coalition for an Equitable Economy. And its organizations, like Amplify, BECMA, MACDC, LISC, LEAF, et cetera, along with our partners in government, so Mass Development, Mass Growth Capital, the office, Secretary Keneally's office, and even banks like yours, right, Bob, Eastern Bank, Berkshire Bank. So it was really multi-sector collaborations and leaders coming together to address immediate needs for small businesses. And now this coalition, I want to say, is formalized, right? So these relationships that were around addressing an emergency now are driving forward policy change at the Massachusetts level in order to create a more equitable and inclusive ecosystem for entrepreneurs of color. So really proud of that work, and it shows that when you come together and you advocate for change, you actually see progress being made.
Yeah, well, thanks to you, Betty, for really leaning in. I mean, time and time again, across the array of issues, most recently, Betty and I have been corresponding on, how do we as a bank speak out regarding the pending decision around Roe? And we have publicly, but how do we go deeper? And Betty is continually challenging us and others to do that across a variety of issues. So thanks for your leadership. I'll now turn it to Dr. Tutwiler. Great to see you, sir. Thanks for joining us today. And as you think about all that's happened in the last 2 years, what examples of social capital have you seen?
Right. You're going to hear a theme here, but before I speak on that, I also want to echo my congratulations to Mayor Driscoll. Incredible work that she's doing right next door to Lynn. So, much as the mayor and Betty Francisco talked about, and Lynn, right as the pandemic began to rage, we'd already established a cross-sector group called the Lynn Education District. This is district, charter, and parochial leaders working together, along with about nearly 30 community-based organizations, coming together to think about really deeply, what are the community needs? How can we check ego and issues around territory and law at the door, and support our community to provide for the children in our community. And that group continued to meet throughout the pandemic, continues to meet to this day. And we've shifted to thinking about how we can leverage our collective wisdom to address even bigger issues in the community around race and equity. And so we see that as a really powerful example of coming together in a time of need, very much the equivalent of cats and dogs playing nicely and working nicely with one another in a community, but more seriously to address the issues of our time.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. You know, the Lynn Education District, if you're not aware of it, is really a special example of collaboration in a community. It was one I became aware of, Patrick, from Joel Abramson over the past couple of years, and one that we've leaned into philanthropically. In fact, headed back up to Lynn next week to learn more as I put it together on my own mind and figure out how to support that really unique effort. So thanks for your leadership on that and for calling that out. And then last on this question is someone who's really been on the front lines of so many of these issues for a long time, certainly in the pandemic for sure. But I think many of us have known Gladys for many years and know that she's a fighter, and she's been out there advocating and supporting community in incredible ways. Gladys, what can you share with, I know you can share so many stories with them, and I've heard so many that are inspiring to me, but as you think about this question today, what comes to mind for you?
So I think when I think of, so first, Kim, felicidades, nuestra futura Lieutenant Governor. Congratulations. So first, when I think of social capital and everything that we were able to do here, first, my favorite social capital is that while people were getting food in our food line, in our pop-up food pantry, when we began back in March 5th of 2020 out of the porch of my house, is to be able to have all those residents become full-time staff members of La Colaborativa. Imagine from being in every line of food, looking for food to feed their families, to working full-time work. For us, it's like an amazing social capital way. I also think that the relationship that we built with Governor Baker and the whole administration, 8 years ago, I was protesting everywhere he would go. I chased him out of our city. At one point, chased him up with bullhorns out of our city. And then here we are sitting down, him coming on a Sunday with only his state police officer to check the building that we're proposed to have, our survival center. So if that's not building social capital and relationship building and making sure that we leave our disagreements behind for the betterment of our humankind, right? And also all the vaccine equity work that we did together. We were never in the food industry. We were never in the medical industry per se. And we did all these things and we continue to do. I also think an incredible social capital that I have never seen before. Although people see that living in Massachusetts a privilege because it's such a progressive city, I always felt like it was the opposite of that. But during the pandemic, everyone stopped giving us labels. Undocumented became human beings. Citizens became human beings, and we all care about protecting people. And for me, that was the best experience ever to see that we didn't have a label. We were not Latinos. We were not color. We were just the human beings protecting each other. And that was the best experience that I ever had. And to be able to witness that after 30 years working in Massachusetts, fue un momento inolvidable. It was an incredible moment, and I would never forget that. So that for me was my highlight during the pandemic, that everyone gave without borders. And for me, that was so unique. And I tell you, I really think that this whole driver's license bill that just passed had a lot to do with that feeling of giving and making sure that we don't put labels behind people. So that for me was the best highlight. Gracias.
Yeah, Thanks, Gladys. And so every year Eastern gives an award to a longtime community advocate, someone who's a real icon in our community. And this past year, we're privileged to present our annual Social Justice Award to Gladys. That is out there, by the way, on video. You should really see the interview. I was privileged to have the conversation I had with Gladys. The story she shares about what they've accomplished. How's the center coming, by the way?
It's coming along. We're on construction mode constantly. Twice a day, I'm walking over there to see the guys do the work. I don't know anything about construction, but I think I'm getting very good at it. Yes, it's coming along.
Great.
As soon as we are ready, I'll let everyone know so you guys can come.
That'd be great. Great, thank you. So the next question I have for all of you, and I'm gonna turn to Betty and then to Patrick, I think, on this one, is a question I was asked this morning at a different event, which was, in 2020, following the murder of George Floyd, a lot of folks woke up to the fact that there was structural racism in our society. God, who knew, right? And the pandemic had sort of laid waste to all of these inequities drawn largely along racial lines in so many areas, health and otherwise. And someone had asked me, so what progress has been made? And it's a tough question to ask as we come off the murders in Buffalo, and it makes you wonder, have we actually gone backwards? I'd like to think we've made some progress, but it's clearly mixed. But Betty, I'd be curious, what's your assessment, and what do we need to do to sustain this energy, this work, to really get at this in a meaningful way?
Yeah, and Bob, that's such a great point. When I saw your question, I said, well, hard to answer along the lines that there's been a lot of progress when, everything on the news is about the families and the victims in Buffalo, and just, hearts go out to those families. I think there's been definitely an awakening, a reckoning, right? And it's pushed every organization, countless leaders to focus on structural racism in some way, right? So I do think that there's been incredible attention paid to it. Lots of commitments and promises have been made. And I think we're inching a little bit closer towards action plans, right? So I've seen large institutions these days that have made, and I keep saying commitment, right? Commitment and the beginning of some action, because they've created racial equity plans, DEI plans, hired staff to implement the plans, right? So maybe a chief equity officer or chief diversity person. So some investment is beginning to be made. However, I think this requires something much more than an action plan or a commitment or a promise or a pledge, but rather action at this point, right? Which is can take a number of forms. The one thing you could begin to do, and you're starting to see this, I know Bob Eastern Bank has made a deep commitment to this work, but one is actually deep investment in communities, right, that have been underinvested in, systematically oppressed, impacted by systemic racism. Actually invest in them, right? So put your dollars where your mouth is. And it could be in the form of grants, significant grant making, or significant investment in areas that have never been invested in by organizations. So it's literally using your money to uplift and start to create a different outcome for communities of color in particular that have been most impacted. The second is about the workforce itself, right? So companies have started to look deeply at their policy, their practices, their benefit programs, or those promoting equity. And if they're not, overhauling them, right, completely, and systematizing practices that embed equity and promote diversity at every level, as well as equity and inclusion. And then the last is, and I'm sure there are many others, and love Patrick to comment on this, but I don't think you can focus on driving out systemic racism because it is created by policy. So structural racism is a policy problem. And so you can legislate it with some policy as well. You have to. And, you know, whether it's a municipality or a company or an enterprise, looking at what you're promoting from a policy perspective, right? So you can't say you're there to support women and families or people of color if at the same time you're advocating against minimum, a livable wage, against paid family leave, against universal child care, right? You can't say you're about those things if you're doing the opposite from a policy perspective, or if you're supporting candidates that don't promote those things. So I think it's looking at the whole and for employees to hold our companies accountable for that.
Yeah, here. And again, your point about action, and you know, I know I speak for many. You know, I'm in the midst of writing a letter to my team about the murders in Buffalo and trying to find the words. And you know, when I think of my own perspective as a straight white guy, you know, you feel inadequate right from the start. Like, what really perspective do I bring? But as a CEO, need to say something. And as I read the statements from so many others, they just sound so empty to me, and they sound so repetitive. So we've got to do more. And Patrick, as you think about this question, what can we do to take action? How can we lean in? Obviously, you work within a very diverse city with a very diverse student body. You see these inequities front and center every day among your kids in all the forms they manifest themselves in. What do you think we can be doing here to sustain this work, make it more meaningful?
All right, well, I'd actually go right back to the question, which asks, you know, have we made progress? I think someone's going to need to define what progress looks like. You know, I would say, you know, with full confidence, you know, I see a lot of things happening. Whether I turn on the television and see, you know, people who look like me more frequently in commercials where I did not before, whether I see, you know, many more directors of equity and inclusion postings in various organizations, more so than I've ever seen before, action plans coming out, as Betty mentioned. But I think there needs to be a definition of what progress is and what it looks like. In my world here in education, I mean, we can say pretty clearly what progress looks like, and we can name pretty clearly what the problem is. I can say definitively that, you know, each year when our dropout or graduation rates come out, there's some predictable data there, right, around who's not graduating and who's dropping out. That is an empirical thing that we need to sort of look inward, do the professional learning, connect with, as Betty said, which I think is super important, the very communities who have been most harmed by our policies, by our practices that result in them, you know, students either not graduating or dropping out. And so, you know, there needs to be, you know, an empirical element to this, a definition of progress. And, you know, on the question of sustaining the work, I think once you know what progress looks like, you know to stay in it until, you know, you've reached a certain point. But I'll speak honestly, I don't know that you ever really arrive in this work. It needs to be constantly nurtured, thought about, reflected upon, talked about, because it changes over time. But I think to the extent that we think about progress, you know, we really need to define what that is and what it looks like.
Yeah.
And that can absolutely be done.
Yeah, no, great point. You know, again, hear that. And so I guess your assessment overall is it's mixed, right? You see progress in some ways, but maybe in the more meaningful ways, we still got a long way to go. So, so next question, just building on this, if I could, I'll go to you first, Gladys. And you mentioned, you know, coming together with the governor on this particular project. But as you think about collaboration between the private sector, between the nonprofit sector, government, to create a more equitable community, what's that look like? And how can we continue to build and address the structural racism and make real progress in our communities?
I think it's calling it. I have mixed feelings about this whole directors of equity and inclusion. I feel that at times we use those to put a person there and address a concern, but if we're not implementing the action plan, why have it? I don't need a glossy document on my desk. So I think that when municipal governors have these individuals in the school department and they're organized and fair, that doesn't bring about change. And that doesn't bring about ending oppression or dealing with the racism or dealing with all those isms. I think that is the easy way out. I feel that when it comes to sort of like structural racism within the private or public sector, I think we just have to be open about it and deal with it. I think that at times we're taboo, somos taboo. Like we don't want to talk about it. We feel it, we see it, we can actually like touch it, right? But we're not dealing with it because it's easier to ignore it or to look to the side. What I always tell people, listen, when we see something, let's call it on it. Because when we agree to stand there and do nothing, when a person is being racist towards someone else and we allow it to happen, we're contributing to that. So I think that in a polite way, in a safe environment, let's talk about it. Why you made her feel that way? Why are you saying that? Can we figure this out? But I think when we continue to sort of like do these type of check the box, I really think disculpen, I don't want to be pessimist. I apologize, but I feel that progress is very minimal. Progress is not really there. It's more like checking the box. Check is done. I hire this person. She's organizing a fair that is going to bring about diversity. That's not. Work with the fire department in the city of Chelsea and see if you can break through. And then we talk about what's happening in terms of progress. But when we don't even welcome the director of diversity inclusionary to a fire department, hall meeting or whatever, that's the problem. So I think that, once again, I apologize for not being sort of like hopeful about this whole progress, but it's my reality. It's what I see here.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, and I understand completely. So, Kim, you've sat at the nexus of these different sectors for a long time, and often been the one who brought them together. So, as you think about creating more equitable communities, what's that look like for you?
I think I want to pick up on some of Gladys's points and just, trying to not be afraid to stare down the truth. We have to be willing to sort of have that level of uncomfortableness within our organizations if we're really going to get to the part where we're embedding these changes in the culture, that we're capturing sort of the hearts and minds. And it isn't just a check the box exercise, to use Gladys's framework. I think we have to acknowledge what's working and what's not be afraid to measure that, to be honest with each other when we're seeing things not going in the direction that we want them to be, and to like work that muscle. It's got to be constant communication. If we have this shared aligned goal of wanting to be an anti-racist organization, okay, what does that mean? How are we implementing that? How are we measuring that? How are we truly, making sure that folks who are part of our organization share that aligned mission? And are we making the hard calls when we need to? And then going back and doing it again the next year, the next month, the next week, the next day, and not being willing to give up on the ultimate goal. And that's it's really, really hard, right? It's really, really hard. I think we have lots of individuals who come with different perspectives and lenses and baggage and whatnot into our space. But I find data to be compelling. Who are we serving with our city services? Who aren't we serving, and why? And can we break down those barriers? And that can create some aha moments, but it takes, stick-to-itiveness and people being on it and continuing to go back and work that muscle and measuring what we're doing, on a regular basis.
Yep, thanks for that. So again, we're right on track with time, and we're down to our final question. So we've got a bunch of folks that have joined us today to hear from you, and thanks for sharing all that you did. And they're looking for ways to make a greater positive impact in our communities. So I'm wondering, what advice would you have for them in 5 words or less to really boil this down, the essence of what people can take with from this session and go forward with? And again, I'll start with you, Patrick, for this one.
There we go.
All right.
Be bold and lean in.
Yeah, thank you very much. Betty?
Vote, protest, advocate, and expand democracy.
Thank you. Gladys?
All of the above, all of them. Yes.
I thought you were going to say, don't check the box. No?
True, that one too. Thank you.
Mayor Driscoll?
I have volunteer, join a board, and vote.
Great. Well, thanks so much. Thanks to each of you for taking the time to join us today to share your work. And thanks for your leadership in so many ways. And with that, David, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Great. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. And thanks again, Bob, for guiding us through this conversation. What a tremendous conversation, and so vitally important. So thank you all so much for your comments. And congratulations again to Mayor Driscoll on receiving the Connect for Community Impact Award. As we wrap up, just a couple final notes. Again, as we mentioned earlier, that this is SCI's largest fundraiser of the year. And if you'd like to make a contribution before we break up today, you can text SCI 2022 to 50155 and simply follow the prompts to make your contribution. We have 2 more events coming up this week. Thursday at noon, we'll be presenting the 2022 SCI Idealist Awards to Juan Fernando Lopera, Makiba McCreary, and James Morton. And after the final virtual presentation of the awards and acceptance remarks online, we'll come together in person for the Idealist Award reception on Thursday evening at District Hall in Boston. If you're interested in joining us for that reception, there are a limited number of tickets still available, and you can reach out to Leah. Her email address is in the chat, and you can visit that link to grab your tickets. There is still time to donate to our fundraiser today. We're going to be keeping it open for a while. And I'd like to thank everybody who's made a contribution during today's event today. Again, you can save that information. It's SCI 2022 to 50155 and just follow the prompts. And that's open all this week as we have our celebrations. On behalf of the SCI team, I'd like to thank you for coming to today's online event. Thank you for your support of SCI and your interest in our discussion about how we can best collaborate to create healthy communities where we can all thrive. This officially concludes our program, but we're going to leave the Zoom open for a little while for anybody who would like to stay and chat informally.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, panelists.
Gracias.
That was a great
Gracias.
panel.
Ciao.
Congratulations again, Mayor Driscoll.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate your kind words.
Congratulations.
Congrats.
See you later.